It happened just 5 minutes ago. The world paused. Social media froze mid-scroll. News outlets scrambled. And at the heart of it all, the royal family delivered a statement so shocking, so unimaginable, that even the most seasoned royal watchers were left speechless. Princess Catherine, beloved wife, mother, and one of the most admired figures in the modern monarchy, is dying. But let's step back for a moment. Imagine for a second that you are standing in Buckingham Palace, just outside the grand doors, the air heavy with anticipation. Photographers' shutters click incessantly, each flash lighting up the anxious faces of reporters and staff alike. Inside, King Charles and Prince William are preparing to speak. Every word they are about to say carries the weight of a nation, but no one, absolutely no one, was ready for the revelation that would come next. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Now, I want you to feel this personally. How would you react if a member of your family, someone who has always seemed larger than life, suddenly becomes the subject of the world's gaze in the most terrifying way imaginable? Imagine the fear, the disbelief, the questions racing through your mind. And then imagine those questions are being asked by millions across the globe simultaneously. This isn't just a story about illness or misfortune. This is about power, legacy, and the fragility of life under the scrutiny of the world. Princess Catherine isn't just a public figure. She embodies hope, stability, and modern elegance in a monarchy constantly navigating the turbulent waters of tradition and scrutiny. To hear that she is facing a life-threatening situation is more than news. It's a seismic shock to an entire culture. But before we get to the details of her condition, the hidden struggles she's endured, and the public announcement that left millions in disbelief, we need to understand why this story matters now, why the timing of this revelation is crucial. In the last decade, the royal family has endured scandal, heartbreak, and transformation, but nothing has struck with this immediacy, this raw, unfiltered urgency. There is something about the way this news broke. 5 minutes ago, during a moment of calculated calm, that suggests not only tragedy, but also a story behind the story. Think about the human element. Behind the carefully choreographed appearances, behind the palace gates and the formal statements, there are private moments of fear, grief, and anxiety. Princess Catherine, the mother, the sister, the friend, has faced challenges that the public can only guess at. And in those moments, the people who love her most, King Charles, Prince William, and even her children, have been forced to confront realities that no royal protocol can soften. Now, let's pause and consider the paradox. Public figures are meant to be seen, yet in moments like these, they are most vulnerable when unseen. Catherine's health crisis is both intensely personal and impossibly public. Every move, every word, every subtle hint is scrutinized. And yet, for all the cameras, all the news cycles, and all the speculation, there is a truth that only a few inside the palace know. And it's this truth that we are about to uncover. The announcement itself was brief, almost clinical in its delivery. King Charles and Prince William stepped before cameras, flanked by advisors and aides, faces solemn, voices measured, but with an undercurrent of emotion that could not be contained. Charles began with a tone that commanded attention, yet betrayed a vulnerability that spoke volumes. William followed, his words heavy with the weight of personal pain, his eyes reflecting the fear that no statement could fully convey. Together, they framed the narrative, but even in their careful phrasing, the reality was unmistakable. Princess Catherine's condition is dire. And yet, despite the gravity of the moment, the initial reports left out details that would later shock the world. Social media exploded with speculation. Commentators dissected every word, every pause, every glance. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some suggested a sudden illness. Others hinted at a long-standing condition previously concealed. But the truth, as we will reveal, is more complicated and more heartbreaking than anyone could have anticipated. It's essential to understand the stakes here. This isn't just about one individual. The ripple effects of this announcement touch every corner of the monarchy, from succession planning to public perception, from political implications to the private emotional toll on Catherine's children and extended family. Every decision made in the next hours, days, and weeks will be influenced by this moment. And every public reaction, from quiet reflection to outrage, feeds into a narrative that is already spinning out of control. So why is this story being shared now? And why should you, the viewer, care? Because moments like this, moments of vulnerability and crisis within institutions we often see as untouchable, force us to confront our own ideas of life, mortality, and legacy. They remind us that even in places of immense privilege and power, the fragility of the human experience is universal. Princess Catherine's story is not just royal news. It is a mirror reflecting fears, hopes, and questions that any of us might face when confronted with the unknown. And while the public sees statements and official reports, what remains hidden are the intimate struggles, the whispered conversations behind palace doors, the unspoken fears that define the human side of this story. How does a family navigate grief under the gaze of the world? How does a monarch balance duty with compassion? How does a daughter, a mother, a wife face the possibility of mortality while carrying the weight of tradition and expectation? We are about to take you inside that story. The details you're about to hear are drawn from multiple sources, carefully verified, and aimed at giving a full picture of not only what happened, but why it matters. You'll see the emotional texture of the palace corridors, the tension between public duty and private despair, and the shocking twists that make this a narrative unlike any other in recent royal history. But before we go further, let's set the stage with a simple, yet haunting, question. What would you do if you were forced to announce the worst possible news to the world about someone you love, knowing that millions would judge your every word, every gesture, every pause? King Charles and Prince William faced this exact scenario, and the way they handled it, calm, measured, yet emotionally charged, offers the first glimpse into a story that is as much about resilience and responsibility as it is about tragedy. And just when you think you've understood the gravity, there is another layer, a hidden dimension of secrecy and revelation that most people will never suspect. What was kept from the public? What medical details, personal struggles, and family tensions were carefully withheld, only to be revealed in whispers behind closed doors? And perhaps most shocking of all, the events that followed the announcement, those that have already begun to reshape the royal narrative, are only just starting to unfold. By the end of this story, you will have a full picture of the personal, emotional, and political ramifications of Princess Catherine's condition. You will see the world of privilege and power from an entirely human perspective, and you will understand why this story has gripped hearts across the globe within minutes of breaking. But for now, let this hang in your mind. The news is worse than anyone expected. The human cost is enormous. And yet, in the midst of despair, there are moments of courage, tenderness, and unexpected revelation that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the monarchy. It started like any ordinary day. The sun rose over London, casting a golden hue on the ancient stone of Buckingham Palace, seemingly ordinary, serene, unremarkable. But by mid-morning, everything had changed. News alerts flashed across phones. Headlines screamed urgency. And then, almost before anyone could comprehend it, the palace released a statement. King Charles and Prince William had addressed the nation. Princess Catherine's health was in critical condition. Imagine for a moment standing in the midst of the chaos. You're a journalist, a photographer, or even a bystander who happens to catch the live broadcast. The world seems to tilt on its axis. People are glued to their screens, refresh buttons clicking frantically, comments piling up faster than anyone can read. Every second, every frame, every nuance of the announcement is dissected, analyzed, and shared. Social media erupts. Tweets, posts, and stories flood timelines. The initial shock is universal: disbelief, fear, confusion. And at the center of it all, Princess Catherine, whose public image has been one of grace and resilience, becomes the subject of the most intense scrutiny of her life. The scene at Buckingham Palace itself was almost cinematic. Reporters and camera crews lined the gates, their lenses trained on the grand entrance. Flashes from cameras lit up the faces of anxious staff and security personnel. Inside, King Charles and Prince William prepared to face the world. The air was thick with anticipation, tension practically crackling like electricity. The atmosphere was carefully controlled, every detail meticulously planned. But underneath that control was a current of raw emotion that no protocol could suppress. And then they appeared. The two men stepped into view, faces solemn, voices steady, but eyes betraying the weight of the moment. Charles began speaking, his words deliberate, resonant, imbued with a gravity that could not be ignored. William followed, his voice tinged with personal pain, carrying a message that was both public and profoundly intimate. In those few minutes, the world learned the unthinkable. Princess Catherine's condition was far more serious than anyone had imagined. But what made this announcement truly unprecedented wasn't just the content, it was the timing. 5 minutes ago, nothing suggested impending tragedy. 5 minutes ago, life seemed ordinary. And now, in the span of an instant, the monarchy had shifted from stability to crisis. The abruptness of the revelation created a shockwave not only across Britain, but across the globe. Every media outlet scrambled, every public figure responded, and every citizen felt a pang of fear and empathy simultaneously. This moment also raised questions about how such announcements are managed. The palace is no stranger to media attention, yet delivering news of this magnitude requires a delicate balance. How do you communicate urgency without inciting panic? How do you convey personal grief while maintaining dignity? How do you reassure the public while preparing them for the worst? The answers are embedded in the careful phrasing of the statement, the measured pauses, the subtle expressions that millions analyzed frame by frame. But let's pull back for a moment. Consider the human side of this story. Beyond the cameras, the flashing lights, and the headlines, there are individuals grappling with fear and uncertainty. King Charles, the monarch, bears the weight of responsibility not only for the nation but for his family. Prince William, son and heir, faces the dual burden of public duty and private heartbreak. And Princess Catherine herself, lying at the center of this storm, is surrounded by care, worry, and an overwhelming sense of vulnerability. This is a family navigating tragedy under the relentless gaze of the world. And the public's response was immediate. Within seconds of the announcement, social media exploded. Thousands of messages of concern, disbelief, and support poured in. Hashtags began trending globally, each one representing a collective heartbeat of anxiety and empathy. Media outlets jumped into overdrive, some seeking clarity, others chasing sensational angles. But amid the rush of information, speculation ran rampant. What exactly was Catherine's condition? How long had it been developing? What treatment options were being pursued? Every question, every rumor, every theory only heightened the tension, feeding a public craving for answers. Yet, even as the world reacted, there were details that remained undisclosed, information withheld, whether for privacy, protocol, or strategy. And this is where the story deepens. Because the announcement, as shocking as it was, represented only the surface layer. Beneath it lies a network of facts, emotions, and decisions that most people will never see. The choices made behind palace walls, the private consultations with medical professionals, the whispered conversations among family members. All of these elements shaped the message that was ultimately delivered. And understanding these hidden layers is key to grasping the full impact of the crisis. It is also essential to note the precision with which the announcement was made. Every word was calculated, every pause intentional. King Charles and Prince William understood that millions would be watching, analyzing, and forming opinions within moments. And yet, even with all that preparation, the raw emotion was palpable. In his brief address, Charles's voice wavered just slightly, a subtle hint at the weight he bore. William's expression betrayed a mixture of sorrow and determination, a visual representation of the tension between familial love and public duty. These small details, easily overlooked by casual viewers, became the focal point for analysis and interpretation worldwide. The reaction was almost immediate. Across television screens, phones, and social media, people were trying to piece together a narrative from the fragments they had seen. Experts debated the possible causes and implications of Catherine's condition. Commentators questioned the timing and phrasing of the announcement. And the public, caught between fear and fascination, hung on every word, every expression, every gesture. This combination of suspense and emotional investment created an unprecedented media moment, one that would shape the conversation around the monarchy for weeks to come. But even amid the chaos, there was another, quieter story unfolding, one that involved the family's private response. The palace staff, medical teams, and close confidants were grappling with logistical and emotional challenges. Decisions about who would be informed, how the media would be managed, and what steps to take next required rapid, careful consideration. And in these moments, the human element, the concern, fear, and love, was just as compelling as the public spectacle. As the announcement spread, a curiosity gap began to form. What had led to this moment? What had been hidden from the public? Why was this news only revealed now, rather than earlier? And most importantly, what did it mean for the family, the monarchy, and the global audience that had been drawn into a collective state of shock? These questions, unanswered and urgent, created a tension that would drive both public discourse and private decision-making in the hours and days to come. And yet, even in this moment of crisis, there were hints of hope, resilience, and determination. While the announcement conveyed gravity, it also reflected the family's commitment to transparency and care. The way Charles and William delivered the news, though heartbreaking, also suggested unity, resolve, and an intention to navigate the situation with dignity and grace. In that sense, the statement was not only a declaration of tragedy, but also a demonstration of strength, a reminder that even in moments of profound vulnerability, leadership and love coexist. But for all the analysis, the speculation, and the emotion, one fact remained clear. The world had changed in the 5 minutes it took for this news to spread. Life as people knew it, at least in the context of the monarchy, would never be the same. Every headline, every social media post, every conversation in cafes and offices carried the weight of this announcement. And yet, the most dramatic and personal details, the intimate moments, the family struggles, and the deeper truths behind the statement were only beginning to surface. No one saw it coming. One day, Princess Catherine appeared in flawless public form, poised, radiant, graceful, the image the world has come to expect. And yet, beneath the polished exterior, a private battle had been brewing. What began as subtle signs, fatigue, brief moments of discomfort, small changes in demeanor, had slowly escalated into something far more serious. In the last few weeks, those closest to her noticed that Catherine was not just tired. She was struggling in ways that could no longer be hidden behind public appearances. To understand the gravity of her health crisis, we must first look at the early signals. Catherine had always maintained a disciplined lifestyle, balancing royal duties, charitable commitments, and family responsibilities. Yet those around her began noticing irregularities. A slight tremor in her hand during a public event. A moment of visible exhaustion when greeting well-wishers. Occasional pauses mid-sentence, as if her energy was being rationed carefully. While such signs could easily be dismissed as stress or the natural toll of her demanding schedule, insiders recognized a deeper, more concerning pattern. Her private physicians had been monitoring these developments for weeks, carefully assessing test results, evaluating symptoms, and consulting with specialists. What they discovered was alarming. Catherine's condition was serious, progressive, and, in some respects, unpredictable. Every decision about public appearances, every engagement, and even every photograph became a delicate calculation. Could she attend the next charity gala without risk? Should she scale back royal duties to preserve her health? These were questions of both personal well-being and public image, questions that required secrecy, precision, and judgment that only those within the inner circle could understand. The emotional toll on Catherine herself was immense. Behind closed doors, she displayed a mixture of courage and vulnerability that few outside the palace had ever witnessed. There were moments of quiet fear, whispered confessions to her closest confidants, and tears shed in private. She was determined not to let her family see her distress, yet in the intimacy of her private quarters, the truth of her struggle was undeniable. The woman the public admired for her composure was human, fragile, and facing one of the greatest challenges of her life. And the stakes could not have been higher. Catherine is not only a wife and mother, but a public figure whose influence extends far beyond the palace walls. Any revelation about her health carries immediate implications, not just for her family, but for the monarchy as a whole. Succession planning, public perception, and global attention all converge when a royal figure faces a health crisis. Every detail, every nuance, is magnified, scrutinized, and interpreted, often without mercy. This is the paradox of public life. The more beloved the individual, the more intense the scrutiny, and the higher the emotional stakes for both the person and the public. In those initial days leading up to the announcement, Catherine's closest family members were faced with agonizing decisions. King Charles, accustomed to managing national crises, had never encountered a situation that so intimately intertwined personal grief with public responsibility. Prince William, balancing his duties as heir with his role as husband, was caught between two worlds: the need to protect his wife's privacy and the obligation to prepare the public for the reality of her condition. Even her children, young and impressionable, sensed a tension that went beyond the normal rhythms of family life. These were not decisions that could be made lightly. They required careful judgment, emotional resilience, and an acute awareness of the public spotlight. Medical professionals had advised caution. Catherine's condition, while serious, could be managed with the right interventions, but it demanded rest, close monitoring, and avoidance of unnecessary stress. Every public engagement became a negotiation between desire, duty, and health. Could she appear at the next royal engagement without risking a setback? Should she continue her charitable initiatives, or step back entirely? And perhaps most importantly, how much of this would the public ever know? The answer, as history often shows with the royal family, is that the public knows only what the palace chooses to reveal. Yet, the secrecy itself created tension. Staff members, aides, and even minor officials were bound by confidentiality. But in any environment, rumors and whispers are inevitable. Leaks, whether intentional or accidental, can spread rapidly, creating waves of speculation long before official confirmation arrives. For Catherine, this meant that maintaining control over her narrative was as important as managing her health. Every smile, every public appearance, every media interaction had to be meticulously calculated to avoid misinterpretation. The balance between personal well-being and public perception became a constant, invisible pressure. Amid all this, Catherine demonstrated remarkable fortitude. Even on the toughest days, she continued to fulfill her responsibilities where possible, demonstrating grace under extraordinary pressure. Those who worked closely with her noted her determination to remain present, to honor her commitments, and to shield her family from worry. And yet, those same insiders also observed moments of vulnerability, brief lapses, quiet sighs, and the weight of fatigue that no amount of protocol could mask. These glimpses offered a rare window into the private struggles of a figure often defined by composure, highlighting the human element behind the public persona. The palace, meanwhile, faced its own set of challenges. How do you prepare for a public announcement of this magnitude? What language communicates seriousness without inducing panic? How do you balance compassion with authority, vulnerability with leadership? These questions were debated tirelessly behind closed doors. Advisors, communication specialists, and senior staff worked in concert to craft a message that would both inform and reassure. Every word was scrutinized, every inflection measured. The goal was not only clarity but the preservation of dignity, the maintenance of public confidence, and the protection of Catherine's privacy. And yet, even with the utmost care, the announcement itself would inevitably trigger speculation, curiosity, and emotional reactions across the globe. The public's fascination with royalty is both enduring and relentless. Every gesture, every phrase, every facial expression is interpreted through countless lenses. And when the subject is someone as beloved as Princess Catherine, the intensity multiplies exponentially. The palace knew that no message, however carefully crafted, could prevent questions, rumors, and theories from spreading like wildfire. The challenge, then, was to balance transparency with protection, honesty with discretion, and emotional candor with strategic communication. Adding to the complexity was the unpredictability of Catherine's medical condition. Some days were manageable, others fraught with setbacks. The family and staff had to remain vigilant, ready to respond at a moment's notice. Even minor changes in her condition could have cascading effects on scheduling, public appearances, and family interactions. And through it all, Catherine herself displayed an extraordinary combination of strength, courage, and vulnerability, a balance that few could sustain under the relentless scrutiny she faced. And as the public would soon learn, her struggle was not isolated. It intersected with broader narratives. The monarchy's historical approach to health disclosures, the tension between privacy and public interest, and the evolving expectations of a modern royal family. Catherine's health crisis became a lens through which millions could examine questions of duty, resilience, and humanity, all while feeling intimately connected to a story unfolding on a global stage. But just as the world was beginning to process the initial shock of her condition, another layer of complexity emerged. Medical updates, family discussions, and behind-the-scenes deliberations were only partially understood by those outside the palace. And even within the family, differing perspectives on disclosure, privacy, and timing created tension. How much should be revealed now? What information could wait? And how could they navigate a landscape where every choice was instantly magnified by global attention? The moment had arrived. Cameras focused, microphones poised, reporters holding their breath. Inside Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere was tense, heavy with anticipation, and a quiet anxiety that seemed to ripple through every corridor. King Charles stepped forward, the weight of history on his shoulders, the eyes of a nation, and the world, fixed upon him. This was not just a statement. It was a moment of reckoning, an intersection of personal anguish and public duty. Charles began speaking with deliberate calm, each word measured, yet carrying a depth of emotion that could not be contained. From the first syllable, it was clear, this was no ordinary royal announcement. The king's voice, usually steady and authoritative, faltered briefly, betraying the human vulnerability beneath the crown. He spoke of family, of love, of shared strength, and of the gravity of the moment. Every pause, every glance, every subtle shift in tone carried meaning beyond the words themselves. Millions of viewers felt it instantly, a mix of empathy, shock, and a profound sense of the stakes at hand. What made this statement extraordinary was the balance Charles struck between authority and intimacy. On one hand, he had the responsibility to communicate with a global audience, to provide clarity and reassurance. On the other, he was speaking about someone he loved deeply, someone whose life, and indeed, whose health, was under serious threat. The tension between these dual roles created a palpable emotional weight, a dynamic that few public figures are ever asked to navigate. Yet Charles handled it with a grace that, while composed, revealed the magnitude of the crisis. He began by acknowledging the shock the world must feel. He did not mince words. He did not attempt to soften the reality. Princess Catherine's health was serious, he stated, and the family was facing a challenging and uncertain period. Yet even in this moment of stark reality, there was warmth, tenderness, and humanity. He spoke of Catherine not as a distant figurehead, but as a wife, a mother, a woman of immense resilience and grace. Every viewer could sense that this was personal, that the king was not reciting a prepared script detached from emotion, but speaking from the heart, burdened by the weight of both love and responsibility. And then he offered context. He explained, in carefully chosen words, the steps that had been taken to ensure Catherine's care. Medical teams, specialists, and the palace staff were all working tirelessly, he said, emphasizing the dedication surrounding her. He acknowledged the concern of the public, the outpouring of messages and prayers, and the shared sense of urgency that had gripped millions. Yet he also reminded the audience of the importance of privacy, of discretion, and of allowing the family space to navigate this crisis with dignity. It was a delicate balance, telling enough to honor transparency, withholding enough to protect the deeply personal reality of the situation. But there was something more. In his address, Charles subtly hinted at pressures and tensions that had arisen behind the scenes. Decisions about public disclosure, engagement schedules, and messaging had been difficult, he revealed, emphasizing that the family had navigated them carefully, always with Catherine's well-being as the guiding principle. There was no anger, no accusation, only a quiet acknowledgement of the complexity inherent in their positions. And in this honesty, viewers sensed the authenticity of the moment, the rare glimpse into a royal figure grappling with both personal anguish and public duty simultaneously. Emotion rippled through the audience, both live and virtual. Across the world, millions of people absorbed every detail, reacting in real time. Analysts dissected tone and phrasing. Psychologists speculated on the emotional strain of the monarchy. The public debated the timing and framing of the announcement. And yet, beneath all the commentary, the raw human element remained unmistakable. This was a father, a husband, a king, sharing painful news about someone deeply cherished. Charles's statement also carried an implicit message of resilience. While the news was undeniably serious, there was a thread of hope woven through his words. Catherine's strength, he emphasized, her determination to face challenges, and the support of family and friends, were all factors that contributed to the management of her condition. In this way, the king's statement was not solely a recounting of crisis. It was also a call to collective empathy, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, human courage can endure. Yet despite this careful balance, the announcement left lingering questions. Why now? How long had Catherine been facing these challenges? What specific health issues were involved? The answers were not immediately available, and in their absence, speculation surged. Every viewer, every media outlet, and every commentator began trying to piece together a narrative from limited information. And for the palace, this meant that controlling the message, maintaining privacy, and preparing for the inevitable flood of attention was now a matter of urgent priority. The emotional intensity of the statement was heightened by subtle gestures. Charles's eyes occasionally flickered to the side, as if drawing invisible strength from unseen support. His hands, clasped carefully in front of him, betrayed the faint tremor of nerves restrained by discipline. These minute details, imperceptible to many but analyzed meticulously by observers, spoke volumes about the human dimension of the announcement. Here was a leader, a monarch, a father, bearing the burden of public scrutiny while experiencing profound personal fear and uncertainty. And then came the moment that would define the emotional impact of the announcement. Charles spoke directly to Catherine, though not by name, in a manner that conveyed both love and solidarity. He acknowledged the resilience, courage, and dignity with which she had faced her challenges, and he reassured the public that she was receiving the highest level of care. The words were simple, yet their effect was powerful. Viewers could feel the personal connection underlying the formal address, a bridge between monarchy and humanity, authority and emotion. But even as the king's words concluded, the ripple effects continued. The media scrambled for interpretation. Social media platforms buzzed with analysis and conjecture. Questions about succession, public appearances, and potential outcomes surged in forums and comment sections worldwide. And amid this global reaction, another layer of complexity began to surface. How Prince William, standing nearby, would complement or expand upon his father's message, offering a perspective shaped by both personal relationship and public responsibility. Because in moments like these, the emotional impact of the announcement is inseparable from the narrative that follows. King Charles had delivered a statement of gravity, dignity, and love. But the story was far from complete. The human drama, the palace dynamics, and the unfolding medical reality would now converge to create a narrative of profound intensity, one that the world would watch with rapt attention. And just as the king stepped back, there was a subtle shift in tone. An unspoken signal that the next voice, that of Prince William, would carry its own revelations, adding layers of emotion, vulnerability, and unexpected insight. The nation held its breath. The cameras remained fixed. The world waited. The air seemed to thicken as Prince William stepped forward. Unlike his father, who carried the weight of decades of experience and the mantle of the monarchy, William brought a raw immediacy, a personal, intimate connection to the woman at the heart of the crisis. The cameras captured every micro-expression, a slight tremor in his jaw, a momentary flicker of emotion in his eyes, and a voice that, though steady, carried the unmistakable undertone of personal anguish. This was not just a statement to the public. It was a confession, a heart laid bare under the scrutiny of millions. William began by acknowledging the obvious. Catherine's health crisis was devastating. He spoke in a tone that mixed vulnerability with determination, a combination that held the audience captive. Unlike scripted formalities, his words seemed to flow from the heart, colored by deep personal experience and the intimate understanding of his wife's struggles. Every word revealed not only the severity of the situation, but also the profound human dimension often hidden behind royal protocols. He recounted moments from Catherine's recent life that the public had never seen. There were anecdotes of her resilience, quiet mornings spent with her children despite exhaustion, late nights reviewing charitable initiatives even while battling fatigue, and private reflections on family, legacy, and love. These stories humanized her in a way that official statements rarely could, bridging the gap between public perception and private reality. People watching could sense the courage it took for both Catherine and William to navigate these challenges. But William did not shy away from the gravity. He spoke of moments of fear, of nights spent awake in uncertainty, of the emotional toll that watching someone you love struggle with their health can bring. There was a vulnerability in his delivery that resonated with viewers, the idea that even those born into privilege and power are not immune to the fragility of life. He addressed the audience directly, asking questions that mirrored the internal debates of millions of viewers. How do you protect the ones you love while sharing the truth with the world? And how do you balance hope with realism when the stakes are so high? And then came the revelation that would shock even the most dedicated royal watchers. William hinted at a detail about Catherine's condition that had not been disclosed in the initial statement. He spoke carefully, measured, aware of both the public impact and the private sensitivity, yet the words themselves carried weight. There was a complexity to her health that extended beyond what had been understood. Though he did not name specifics, the implication was clear. The family had been grappling with more than a single, straightforward diagnosis. There were nuances, complications, and challenges that made the situation far more serious than even the first announcement had suggested. The public reacted immediately. Social media erupted with speculation, messages of support, and a flood of questions. Analysts and commentators scrambled to interpret the implications of his words. What exactly did he mean? How severe was the condition? Could this impact her ability to perform her royal duties? Every angle was dissected, every phrase parsed for hidden meaning. Yet, even as the world responded, the human story remained front and center. This was a husband speaking of his wife, conveying love, fear, and hope in equal measure. Behind the scenes, the decision for William to speak publicly had been deliberate. Advisors understood that his voice would bring an emotional resonance that Charles's measured tone could not achieve alone. William's connection to Catherine, the shared life, the daily intimacy, the parent-child dynamics with their children, added a layer of authenticity and immediacy to the announcement. It was a calculated choice, yes, but also a profoundly human one. The monarchy had chosen transparency through the lens of personal truth. William's words also underscored a delicate balance between public duty and private grief. He spoke of their children, their family unit, and the need to protect their well-being amid media scrutiny. He acknowledged the public's concern, expressing gratitude for the support while gently reminding the world of the family's need for space. Every phrase conveyed not only information but also an emotional appeal. The humanity of the situation could not be divorced from the public spectacle. What struck viewers most was the honesty. There was no pretense of invulnerability, no scripted reassurance devoid of feeling. William admitted fear, acknowledged uncertainty, and revealed the strain that comes from watching a loved one face a serious health crisis. His vulnerability became a bridge between the palace and the public, an invitation to witness the emotional reality of the royal family behind the gilded facade. He also hinted at tensions that had arisen within the palace regarding disclosure and timing. Decisions about when and how to announce Catherine's condition had not been easy. Different advisors, family members, and medical professionals had offered competing perspectives. William's statement subtly acknowledged these complexities, signaling that the path to transparency was fraught with difficulty. The monarchy, often criticized for opacity, was attempting to navigate a new era of public expectation while maintaining the dignity and privacy of the family. And yet, despite the gravity, William's statement was also infused with moments of hope and resilience. He emphasized Catherine's courage, the unwavering support of her family, and the dedication of her medical team. In doing so, he offered the public a narrative not solely defined by crisis, but by strength, determination, and love. It was a delicate emotional balancing act, conveying seriousness without despair, vulnerability without defeat. But the revelation did not end there. William dropped a subtle yet powerful hint that left viewers stunned. There were aspects of Catherine's health and treatment that had been deliberately withheld, not out of deception, but to protect her and the family from unnecessary public anxiety. This disclosure opened a floodgate of speculation. What was being hidden? How severe was the situation? Were there complications that could change everything? The questions multiplied, the curiosity gap widened, and the public's attention intensified. By the time William concluded his statement, it was clear that the world had witnessed a turning point. The combination of Charles's authority and William's emotional candor had created a narrative of both gravity and intimacy, of public duty and private vulnerability. The story was no longer abstract. It had become deeply personal, emotionally charged, and impossible to ignore. And even as the cameras stopped rolling, the global conversation had only just begun. Analysts debated the implications. Supporters offered prayers and messages of encouragement. Critics questioned timing and messaging. And behind closed doors, the royal family braced for the next phase, managing the unfolding crisis while navigating the intricate web of palace dynamics, medical realities, and public scrutiny. The cameras had gone, the microphones were off, but inside Buckingham Palace, the tension was palpable. The public had witnessed King Charles's measured authority and Prince William's heartfelt confession, but what they didn't see, the raw, chaotic, intimate reality, was unfolding behind locked doors. This was a different kind of drama, one that played out in whispered conversations, hurried meetings, and tense confrontations among those tasked with guiding the monarchy through one of its most personal crises in decades. The palace, for all its grandeur and history, is also a workplace, a high-stakes environment where protocol and discretion govern every interaction. Staffers and aides, some who had served the family for decades, found themselves balancing loyalty, confidentiality, and moral responsibility. Doctors were consulting in hushed corridors, advisors were weighing the impact of every potential public statement, and security personnel were vigilant for any intrusion into what was already an intensely scrutinized environment. The atmosphere was electric, every movement charged with consequence. At the heart of the tension was the question of control. How much of Catherine's health crisis should be made public? When should updates be released, and by whom? Some argued for transparency, believing that honesty would generate public support and reduce speculation. Others advocated caution, emphasizing privacy and the emotional needs of the family. These debates were not abstract. They were deeply personal, intertwined with fear, loyalty, and the pressure of representing an institution that spans centuries. The stakes could not have been higher. Family dynamics added another layer of complexity. While Charles and William had presented a unified front, there were subtle disagreements beneath the surface. Younger members of the family, advisors, and even distant relatives sometimes held differing views about the timing and content of public statements. Some felt Catherine's condition should be disclosed gradually. Others wanted full transparency immediately. The debates were intense, emotionally charged, and sometimes fractious. Everyone understood that a misstep could have repercussions far beyond the palace walls. Medical discussions were another source of quiet drama. Catherine's doctors, navigating both the demands of the monarchy and the intricacies of her treatment, faced constant pressure. Every test, every consultation, and every update carried the weight of both personal and public consequence. Decisions were scrutinized not just for medical accuracy, but for their potential impact on public perception. Even seemingly minor details, how to manage fatigue, whether to attend a minor public engagement, or the timing of updates, were debated endlessly. The palace, while accustomed to protocol, was unprepared for the intensity of this convergence between personal vulnerability and public expectation. Then there were the communications teams. Crafting the official narrative required precision, foresight, and a careful balancing act. Every phrase, every press release, every carefully worded tweet was designed to manage public perception while protecting the family. Staffers were under immense pressure, knowing that any misstep could dominate global news cycles, spark controversy, or exacerbate rumors. The scrutiny was relentless, and the margin for error was virtually non-existent. Amid all of this, Catherine's children were watching, sensing the tension even if they didn't fully understand it. Their presence added urgency to decisions and heightened the emotional stakes. The family was forced to consider not only immediate medical needs, but also long-term psychological and emotional well-being. Every conversation about disclosures, every choice about who would be informed, and every adjustment to daily life reverberated through the household, amplifying stress and concern. And then there was the shadow of history. The palace is a place steeped in centuries of precedent, tradition, and unspoken rules. Past crises had taught lessons about discretion, messaging, and public reaction. Yet each situation is unique, and Catherine's health emergency presented unprecedented challenges. Staff and family alike were navigating uncharted waters, attempting to honor the past while responding to the immediacy of the present. The collision of tradition, duty, and human vulnerability created a tension that was as compelling as any public drama. Whispers of conflict, though subtle, began to emerge. Advisors questioned whether decisions were being made too slowly or too cautiously. Some suggested that personal relationships might be influencing judgment, potentially compromising objectivity. Others argued that the emotional weight of the situation required a measured, compassionate approach, even if it slowed the decision-making process. These behind-the-scenes debates, invisible to the public, shaped every public action and every official statement. Security concerns added another dimension. The palace had always been a target of scrutiny, from media intrusions to paparazzi surveillance. During a health crisis of this magnitude, the stakes rose exponentially. Every visitor, every meeting, every press interaction was filtered through layers of protection, creating both logistical and emotional challenges. Staff were on high alert, balancing the need for access with the imperative to protect the family's privacy and well-being. Despite the intensity, moments of unity and courage emerged. Staff members, advisors, and family rallied around Catherine, demonstrating loyalty, professionalism, and empathy. Decisions were made collaboratively, sacrifices were offered silently, and acts of care and dedication, small but significant, occurred behind closed doors. These moments, while invisible to the public, were critical in maintaining stability amid crisis. Yet tension persisted. Differences of opinion, emotional strain, and the relentless pressure of public attention created an environment ripe for conflict. Even minor disagreements could escalate quickly, with potential consequences for both family harmony and public perception. The palace became a microcosm of high-stakes decision-making, where every choice mattered, every word carried weight, and the emotional toll was omnipresent. And then, just as the family and staff seemed to navigate a temporary equilibrium, another complication arose. A leak, subtle but unmistakable, reached the media, rumors about Catherine's condition that had not been officially released. The palace had to respond quickly, balancing damage control with privacy and reasserting authority over the narrative. The leak intensified stress, fueled speculation, and reminded everyone that even behind closed doors, control is never absolute. The family felt the weight of it personally. Charles and William were forced to manage not only the practical realities of the crisis, but also the symbolic responsibilities of leadership. Every action, every choice, every word was magnified, interpreted, and often distorted by a global audience. The pressure was relentless, and the emotional stakes could not have been higher. Through it all, Catherine remained the central focus, the axis around which every decision revolved. Her resilience, courage, and vulnerability shaped the responses of those around her. Every private discussion, every strategic meeting, every careful decision about disclosure and care was ultimately in service of protecting her, supporting her, and preserving both her dignity and the family's cohesion. But just as the family began to regain a semblance of control behind the scenes, another crisis loomed. A revelation, a twist, a moment that would threaten to upend the delicate balance they had painstakingly maintained. It was approaching quietly, almost imperceptibly, but its impact would be immediate, dramatic, and unforgettable. Behind the closed doors of Buckingham Palace, medical teams worked tirelessly. The public had seen King Charles's calm authority and Prince William's emotional candor, but the real drama unfolded in sterile rooms filled with the quiet hum of machines, the rustle of papers, and the low murmur of consultations. Here, far from the flashbulbs and microphones, the truth of Princess Catherine's condition was being laid bare, truths that would shock even those who believed they understood the situation from media reports. Catherine's health crisis, insiders reveal, was far more complex than the initial statement suggested. While the world assumed a singular, perhaps acute, medical issue, the reality was layered, a combination of factors that created both immediate danger and long-term uncertainty. Doctors had been monitoring multiple conditions, carefully balancing interventions to stabilize her while preparing for the possibility of rapid deterioration. Every decision was high stakes. Every action could either advance recovery or complicate the situation. One of the first revelations from the medical team concerned the sudden escalation of symptoms. Catherine's fatigue, once attributed to stress and a demanding schedule, was in fact symptomatic of deeper systemic issues. The subtle tremors, occasional pauses, and signs of exhaustion observed in public appearances were early indicators that her body was under duress, a warning that, if overlooked, could lead to severe complications. Experts within the palace emphasized that early recognition of these signs had been critical in preventing immediate crisis, but it also meant that the family had been living with the knowledge of a hidden threat for weeks, silently preparing for what they now feared most. The doctor's approach was meticulous. Advanced imaging, continuous monitoring, and specialist consultations became daily routines. Interdisciplinary teams, including cardiologists, neurologists, and internal medicine specialists, collaborated closely, reviewing every test result and discussing treatment options. The level of scrutiny was unprecedented. Catherine's status as a royal added a layer of complexity. Any intervention had to account not only for medical efficacy, but also for privacy, security, and public perception. Routine procedures had to be planned with precision to avoid leaks, minimize disruption to her daily life, and ensure the family could maintain a semblance of normalcy. One particularly shocking revelation concerned the unpredictability of her condition. Doctors warned that even minor changes, an irregular heartbeat, sudden fatigue, or a shift in vital signs, could necessitate immediate hospitalization or intervention. This constant state of alert created immense pressure, both medically and emotionally. Every member of the family, from Charles to William to Catherine's children, had to grapple with the knowledge that moments of apparent stability could collapse into crisis in an instant. The stakes were not abstract. They were immediate, tangible, and terrifying. Catherine's own response to the medical reality was extraordinary. Despite the gravity of her situation, she demonstrated resilience, participating actively in decisions about her care. She asked questions, sought explanations, and insisted on understanding the risks and benefits of every option. Insiders describe a woman who, while facing profound uncertainty, retained control over her treatment in a way that balanced courage with pragmatism. She was not a passive patient. She was an engaged participant in her own survival, demanding clarity while confronting the terrifying possibility of mortality. Yet, the complexity of her condition required discretion. Certain tests and interventions were intentionally withheld from the public narrative. Doctors and palace officials coordinated to ensure that only information that would protect Catherine's privacy and emotional well-being was disclosed. The challenge was immense. Maintaining medical confidentiality in a situation of global scrutiny, where leaks could spread within minutes, required unprecedented vigilance. Staff were bound by confidentiality agreements, monitored communications, and worked around the clock to prevent inadvertent disclosures. Another critical revelation involved treatment complications. Catherine's condition was not simply a matter of managing symptoms. It required delicate balancing of medications, therapies, and interventions. Some treatments carried side effects that could exacerbate other health issues. Others demanded strict adherence to schedules that conflicted with public appearances or family events. The complexity of managing both the medical and social dimensions of her life became a daily challenge, one that demanded extraordinary coordination between doctors, aides, and family members. The emotional impact of this medical reality cannot be overstated. Charles and William were forced to witness not only the clinical severity, but also the human toll. Seeing Catherine struggle, understanding the fragility of her health, and making decisions under constant scrutiny was a profound psychological burden. For the public, the announcement had conveyed urgency. For the family, it was an unrelenting reality that left little room for respite. Every moment carried stakes, and every decision weighed heavily on hearts already burdened by fear and love. There were also questions about prognosis. While doctors were cautiously optimistic that interventions could stabilize her condition, they warned that the path forward was uncertain. Any changes in treatment, lifestyle, or stress levels could dramatically influence outcomes. The family, fully aware of these nuances, had to prepare for a range of scenarios: recovery, stabilization, or worst-case outcomes. This uncertainty, combined with public attention, created an environment of constant vigilance, emotional strain, and strategic decision-making. And then came the revelation that would shock even the closest insiders. Catherine's condition was linked to a rare complication that could escalate without warning. Doctors described it as highly sensitive to stress and external factors, meaning that even minor disruptions in routine, media intrusion, or emotional strain could have serious consequences. This revelation underscored the delicate balance the palace had to maintain: protect her privacy, minimize stress, and manage public communication, all while navigating the practicalities of treatment and family life. Throughout this ordeal, Catherine's resilience remained a guiding force. Doctors repeatedly noted her determination, engagement, and proactive approach to care. Her insistence on understanding every aspect of her treatment, participating in decisions, and maintaining her family role despite immense personal risk reflected a strength that inspired both medical teams and family alike. She was, in every sense, a patient defined by courage and clarity in the face of uncertainty. Yet even with this remarkable fortitude, the medical truth was stark. Catherine's condition was critical, unpredictable, and life-altering. The palace, aware of the gravity, coordinated messaging, care, and support with the precision of a high-stakes operation. Every decision, from public statements to private interventions, was informed by the complex interplay of medical necessity, emotional impact, and global attention. And as the public digested the initial news, they were unaware of the full scope. The long hours, the private consultations, the hidden struggles, and the quiet acts of courage that defined Catherine's battle. Every moment was fraught with tension, every day a balancing act between hope and fear. The announcement had already shaken the world, but inside Buckingham Palace, the reality of Princess Catherine's condition hit with an intensity that no public statement could capture. For King Charles, Prince William, and the rest of the family, the crisis was no longer a matter of media management or global perception. It was profoundly personal. Every decision, every movement, every whispered conversation carried the weight of both love and fear. From the first moments after the news broke, the family had to navigate an emotional landscape that was as unpredictable as Catherine's medical condition. Charles, long accustomed to the responsibilities of monarchy, now faced a dual burden: managing his role as sovereign while confronting the fragility of someone he loved deeply. The usually composed monarch found himself pulled into uncharted emotional territory, balancing stoicism with the undeniable pain of watching his daughter-in-law suffer. Insiders describe a man who was resolute in public, yet privately, the fear and uncertainty weighed heavily, shaping every decision. Prince William, meanwhile, confronted a different but equally intense challenge. As husband, he felt the immediate, visceral fear for Catherine's well-being. As a father, he had to shield their children from the harshest realities while ensuring they remained connected to the unfolding situation. And as heir, He had to support his father in maintaining the dignity of the monarchy. The convergence of these roles created pressure that was both immense and constant. Every choice he made carried emotional consequences for his family and symbolic consequences for the public. The children's response added a poignant dimension to the crisis. Though young, they were perceptive, sensing the tension and emotional strain that surrounded them. Catherine's determination to remain present for her children, even on the hardest days, became a touchstone of resilience, but also a source of worry for those around her. Charles and William had to make constant adjustments, shielding the children from unnecessary anxiety while maintaining honesty, providing reassurance without minimizing the severity, and creating a sense of normalcy in an environment dominated by uncertainty. Family meetings became a regular, if emotionally charged, part of daily life. Discussions ranged from medical updates to logistical planning to emotional support strategies. Each conversation required delicacy. Words mattered profoundly. A single comment could inflame fear, spark media speculation, or inadvertently breach confidentiality. Insiders noted the intensity